The early 2000s was a critical period for Cyprus. Years of talks and negotiations took place, but ultimately ended in failure. I sit down with Alvaro de Soto, who was the United Nations Special Envoy to Cyprus during that time, and he acted as mediator between the parties. I am Naim Öngören, and this is One on One. Mr. De Soto, thank you very much for talking to TRT World. During the years that you served as the United Nations Special Advisor on Cyprus, what were the main challenges you faced?
Well, the challenges varied. At the beginning, it was very difficult to engage the Turkish side, frankly. And toward the end, it was exactly the opposite. At the end, at the final session at Bürgenstock, it was very difficult to persuade the Greek Cypriot leader to engage in negotiations. So there were other challenges. I'd say if there was one challenge that I had to identify, it would be Rauf Denktaş. He was an immovable obstacle. He had long before this effort, determined that the reintegration of Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots could bring no good. And he had some words of warning. He said, mark my words, the Greek Cypriots will only entertain one type of relationship with the Turkish Cypriots, and it is a relationship of domination.
So when the leaders of the two communities decided to come together, what were the main expectations from the both sides for a solution in the island, and do you think they were ready to talk?
Well, there was a reason for hope, because for the first time since the efforts that we had started at the end of '99, at the start of 2000, it was the first time a Turkish Cypriot leader who actually wanted to reach an agreement. But there was a change by that time in the leadership on the Greek Cypriot side. And also we were running up against deadlines. Any leverage that we had started to disappear. First with the final decision of the European Union to invite the 10 candidates with whom there had been negotiations to accede. Secondly, a few months later, when the Treaty of Accession was signed by the Greek Cypriots, and the countdown began. 1 year. 1 year later, the Republic of Cyprus, led by the Greek Cypriots, would enter unless there was an agreement. But by that time, there was another leader on the Greek Cypriot side who was less desirous of reaching an agreement, and also the accession of Cyprus, divided or not, to the European Union was very difficult to stop. You couldn't. It was a locomotive that could not, that didn't have any brakes, so it was going to go through. But you know, we did our best.
After many years of work led by you and Secretary General Kofi Annan, the Annan Plan was proposed, but it was rejected by the Greek Cypriots. How did you feel when the first results came in on your table on the referendum day?
Well, I wasn't entirely surprised, because we had seen some polls and indications. We thought that there was a good chance of an affirmative position being taken by the Turkish Cypriots. I think that's the reason why Mr. Denktaş withdrew from politics, because he saw that coming. He was a very clever politician. But on the Greek Cypriot side, they had not taken that much of an interest. I'm talking about the people, the voters in the referendum. They didn't study the plan as the Turkish Cypriots did. They were awaiting, essentially, orientation from their leadership. And the leader recommended voting against it, and quite categorically. And there were differences. Some Greek Cypriots leaders, including Mr. Kledides, and the current president, Mr. Anastasiades, were in favor. They campaigned in favor of the plan. But, let's say, the fear on the part of the Greek Cypriots, which was sort of encouraged by the Greek Cypriot leader at the time, prevailed over any favorable disposition that might have existed.
What about the European Union's enlargement policy? Do you think it impacted the approach of Greek Cypriots to the referendum?
Well, in a sense, the European Union provided the starting gun for these negotiations, you know? And because they decided on an enlargement, and they decided that they would negotiate with 10 countries, among them Cyprus. And so that, what it provided was a deadline, in a sense. We didn't know the precise date, but we knew that there was a window to negotiate as long as the negotiations of all 10 candidates for accession lasted. However, it had been agreed beforehand at a summit in Helsinki in late 1999 that the European Union expected of both sides to negotiate in good faith, and that a final decision on Cypriot accession would be taken in light of that cooperation with the negotiation. So that left some margin, and Mr. Kledides took the negotiations very seriously, and he wanted to come to terms, and he was very constructive. I have said it in public, and I have said it since, and I am absolutely convinced of it. But until the last year or so, that worked well, but without Turkish Cypriot, without, let's say, support from the Turkish Cypriot side. On the other hand, in Turkey, things began to move upon the election of AK, where things changed totally.
Do you think the Annan Plan was the last chance for the unification of the island?
I still think that Cyprus is a country where there's a strong potential for integration, and it would be a much more successful country, if I may say so, if it were united and if the people were able to live and cohabit among themselves. But it will be difficult to put that back together. I had some hope during the period when the Greek Cypriot leader was Mr. Anastasiades, because he had supported the plan. But for reasons that I really don't know, they were unable to come to terms. I have not followed it closely since I moved on to other things.
So Turkey is suggesting two-state solutions in the island, and there was Annan Plan which failed. So do you see any kind of resolution likely to happen in the near future and finding a solution for the island?
Well, we always at the United Nations saw it as our mission to bring about what the two sides had agreed on in the late 70s, which was a bizonal, bicommunal federal state. And the Annan Plan, as you call it, was the first time that an entire proposal containing all aspects, it was essentially key in hand, it was ready to operate, had been drawn up, and we put it before them. And it was, I insist, a workable plan and an effective one. They even negotiated, and this was actually negotiated, the two sides, and agreed on something like 170 federal laws which would have come into force on the day of entry into force of the agreement. It was ready to work. It would have required the support of the Greek Cypriots, however. So I believe that it is more than possible, and I think that if the leadership on both sides agreed to do this, even making changes as necessary, it's still possible. If they agreed, it could be modified to accommodate both sides. And I don't think it would require too much change. So they've rejected this particular version, but perhaps if they consider it, and if the Greek Cypriot leader endorses rather than opposes the plan that is before them, that would change everything.
Mr. De Soto, thank you very much for your time.
My great pleasure.